A solitary rancher, worn thin by grief and years of silence, lives out his days in the frozen reaches of the frontier when a stranger, fierce, guarded and mother to two quiet children, arrives at his door. The ground between them begins to shift. Neither came seeking more than survival, but something unspoken lingers in the cold. Wyoming territory, Willow Creek, winter of 1879. They say the cold that year came early and stayed long, like it had a grudge against the land. Folks buried their animals by November, their hopes not long after. But before the blizzards, before the frost sunk into the bones of men too proud to beg warmth from heaven, there was a moment, brief and burning, that still haunts these hills. Sometimes a man don't hear his own heart beat until it slows down near to stoppin'. Out here, where the wind cuts like truth and the silence presses on your chest, you come to know what matters and what don't. I used to think peace was the absence of noise, but too much quiet. It starts to echo, reminds you of what's gone, what you done, what you can't fix. Folks talk about storms like they're trouble sent from the Lord. But truth is, some storms carry more than just snow and howl. Sometimes they bring something back with them, something you didn't know you were waiting for. That winter, the sky hung low and mean. Cold sunk into the bones of the land and stayed there. Fires burned low, wolves kept close, and me, I thought I was already buried, just hadn't laid down yet. Then came the knock that wasn't a knock. The wind brought it. Or maybe it was fate, wearing a woman's shape, carrying two half-frozen young'uns and secrets tight behind her eyes. I never asked for company, never planned on surviving the season. But that door opened all the same. And after that, nothing was the same again. The wind came down from the peaks with a knife's edge, dry and bitter, slicing through the stillness like it meant to remind a man he was alive. The snow had crusted hard over the pines, and each step outside cracked like bone under boot. Above, the sky was colorless, a flat, aching gray that gave no sense of time, just cold. He moved through it like a shadow, tall, lean-shouldered, wrapped in a worn buffalo hide coat with the fur turned in. His face was half covered in frost-bitten stubble, jaw set hard as if clenched years ago and never quite let go. The cabin sat at the edge of the tree line, crooked and low, its chimney coughing out smoke in slow, struggling puffs. The roof sagged under snow. The porch groaned when he stepped on it, but it held. Everything here held, just Bo. He opened the door without looking back. Inside, the warmth was earned, built from days of wood chopping, nights of rationing. A kettle hissed over the fire, a tin cup sat half full of old coffee on the table, gone cold. He didn't bother drinking it. There were no voices in this place, no music, no laughter, just the creak of wood and the whisper of fire. Sometimes the wind howled down the chimney and sounded almost like a cry, but he'd learned not to answer. On the far wall hung a rifle, a long coat, and a hat untouched since fall. Next to them, a small wooden shelf held three objects: a folded letter, tied in blue ribbon and never opened, a Bible with a cracked spine, and a tiny carved horse missing one leg. He sat in the rocking chair but didn't rock, just stared into the fire like it owed him something. His left hand shook faintly. He clenched it into a fist. Outside, the snow deepened. It would be a hard freeze tonight. He rose, stiff from stillness, and stepped back out into the cold. The axe waited beside the stump. He split wood until his breath came ragged, until his arms ached. No one to see him, no one to ask why. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, the shadows stretched long across the drifts. He stood there for a moment, eyes scanning the empty white. Not a soul. He turned back toward the cabin. The grave behind it stayed untouched, just a mound under snow marked by a wooden cross he never got around to carving a name into. Didn't need to. He knew who lay there. And knowing was enough. The wind rose like a living thing, wild, fast, full of teeth. By sundown it was screaming through the pines, snapping branches clean, pushing snow in great sheets across the ridge. The old man had seen plenty of winters claw their way down the mountain, but this one came sudden and wrong. The kind of wrong you feel in your chest before you know why. He'd just finished banking the fire and closing the shutters when the first sound hit. Not a knock, not even a cry. Just a dull, dragging thump against the cabin wall, like something too weak to stand, too stubborn to fall. He paused, hand near the rifle, listened. Another thump, then nothing, then the wind again. He waited, breath shallow. Could have been a branch, could have been a bear, could have been his own mind turning sour from silence. But the wind shifted, and with it came a sound no man could mistake. A child, sobbing, muffled, hurting. He moved fast, threw the latch, braced the door against the blow of the wind. It burst inward anyway, snow and cold slapping his face like a threat. For a moment, all he could see was white and shadow. Then they stumbled in. A woman nearly crawling, wrapped in a shawl so stiff with ice it cracked. In her arms, a girl, 8, maybe 9, face pale, lips blue. Behind them, a boy, smaller, maybe 5, clutching the woman's skirt with mittenless hands and the kind of look in his eyes that don't belong to children. She tried to speak, failed. Her mouth opened, but the wind stole whatever word was there. He didn't ask who they were, didn't ask what brought them. That wasn't the time. He hauled the girl from her arms and laid her near the hearth. The boy he grabbed under the arms and sat on the bearskin rug. The woman crumpled against the door and didn't get up. He shut it behind her with a groan and latched it hard. For a moment, there was only the fire, popping and hissing, then her coughing, deep, raw from the gut. He crouched beside her. "You alive?" She nodded, barely. He tossed a blanket over her, then moved to the girl, touched her cheeks, cold but not gone. Same with the boy. He stoked the fire higher, added wood, hung the kettle. The girl stirred, her eyes fluttered open, locked on his. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared, like she'd seen ghosts and wasn't quite sure he wasn't one of them. He spoke low, more to hims, elf than them. "Damn fool storm." Then he looked up at the door, at the wind howling outside. Something about the way she'd looked at him, something about the way they didn't belong out there, and how deep down, neither did he. The cabin was small, built for 1, maybe 2 if they didn't mind brushing elbows at the stove. Now it held 4, and the air inside had changed, less quiet, more alive. The storm still beat against the walls, but it sounded further off somehow, as though even it knew to keep its distance for a while. He moved without words, pulling blankets from the trunk at the foot of his cot, laid them over the children first. The boy clutched his coat like a shield, fingers purple from cold. The girl, Clara, she'd whispered her name later, had stopped shaking, but her eyes stayed wide, locked on the fire, like it might go out at any moment. He stoked it higher just in case. The woman lay curled near the door, face raw with windburn, one boot missing. Her hair was tangled, wet and dark like river silt. He crouched near, offered a tin cup of boiled water. She blinked, reached, drank in short gulps. "You're safe," he said, though the words felt strange in his mouth, unused. "Storm's not getting in here." She nodded, lips split from cold. "Eliza," she rasped. "That's me." He just nodded, stood up and stepped back. Names didn't change what a man saw. He saw someone running, that was clear. From what, he didn't know yet. From the wall peg, he grabbed his spare shirt and hung it near the hearth to warm. Then he moved to the stove and broke jerky into a pot of beans, added snow for water, stirred slow. The smell began to fill the space. Salt, smoke, meat. It pulled the boy's head up. "You hungry?" he asked, glancing over. The boy nodded without words. He handed him a tin plate, then the girl. She held it with both hands, as if expecting it to be taken. "Back. You got names?" he asked, not looking at Eliza this time. "Clara, Tommy." Her voice came clearer now. "They're mine. He didn't ask where the father was. Didn't need to. The firelight softened them. Clara's cheeks colored up again, and Tommy leaned into the blanket, watching the stew with solemn eyes. He sat down across from them, spoon in hand, but didn't eat. Just watched them eat. Watched their shoulders drop, little by little, with each bite. "You live here?" Clara asked after a long stretch of quiet. He nodded once. "Alone?" He nodded again. She studied him. "Why?" He didn't answer. After a while, she laid her head on her brother's shoulder and fell asleep. Eliza pulled the blanket tighter around herself, coughed once, then stared into the fire. "We didn't mean to come this far. Just needed off the trail. Then the weather turned." He said nothing. She looked at him, eyes heavy. "Didn't know anyone was still living up this way." He shrugged. "Most ain't." She looked like she wanted to say more, but thought better of it. He stood and walked to the window, cracked the shutter. Snow piled against the glass. The wind had eased, but only just. He looked out at the dark trees, the shifting shadows. "You got enemies chasing you?" he asked, voice even. Eliza hesitated. "Don't know if they're still behind us." He gave a nod that wasn't agreement but understanding. "I ain't looking to bring trouble," she added. "Just needed a night." He didn't answer right away. Then, "Reckon you can have two. Weather's mean tonight." She didn't thank him. Didn't need to. He hadn't said it to be kind. Later, when they'd all gone quiet and the fire had burned low to embers, he sat near the window with his rifle across his knees. His eyes didn't close. He watched the door. The shadows, their shapes by the hearth. Something had shifted in the cabin. Not warmth, not comfort, but something. The kind of something a man don't let in unless he means to change. Morning came slow and quiet, the kind of hush that made a man feel like the world was holding its breath. Snow clung to the window panes, soft and thick, muting everything outside. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down low, but the warmth still lingered. He was already up, boots on, kettle steaming on the stove. The children were still asleep, curled together like pups, one blanket tangled between them. Eliza sat on the edge of the cot, combing Clara's hair with her fingers, careful not to wake her. "Storm's past," he said, voice flat. She nodded, eyes not leaving her daughter. "Don't mean the cold has." They didn't say much after that. The days that followed ran together like melted snow, quiet, thick with unspoken things. He kept chopping wood, feeding the stove, hunting what he could find. She cleaned what she could reach, patched the boy's coat, boiled water over the fire like she'd always done it. They never spoke of how long they'd stay. That answer hung in the air, heavier with each sunrise. The children warmed faster than the adults. Clara started talking first, about nothing and everything. Birds she'd seen out the window, dreams she'd had. She asked if the cabin had a name. He said no. "I think it should," she replied, scribbling with charcoal on a scrap of kindling. "All good places got names." Tommy didn't speak much, but he followed the rancher outside now, watched him with a kind of quiet curiosity, helped stack wood without being asked. Took the axe once, too heavy for him, but still tried. The man said nothing, just watched him struggle, then showed him the right way to hold it. That evening, they all sat around the table for the first time. The table itself was old pine, nicked and uneven, and one leg had a shim of folded paper under it to keep from rocking. He served stew. Nobody said grace. Eliza's eyes lingered on his hands as he ladled food. His fingers were rough, burned in places, a long scar cutting through the backs. Pick of one. Clara slurped, smiled. "This is better than Mama's," she said. Eliza swatted her shoulder gently. "Hush." He gave a ghost of a grin. "Don't lie to the cook." They ate in slow silence after that. Every so often, a pop from the fire or a cough from Tommy. But the quiet was easy now, not brittle like before. Clara broke it. You got any kids? The spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Eliza's eyes darted to his face, then down again. The boy just looked between them all. He didn't answer right away. Set the spoon down soft. Had. Clara blinked. Where are they? Eliza started to hush her, but he raised a hand. He didn't look angry, just tired. Gone. Some years now. Clara looked down. Tommy didn't move. No one said sorry. That was better. Later that night, after the fire dimmed and the children had curled into sleep again, Eliza stayed at the table, running her fingers along the grain. She glanced at the shelf, at the small carved horse, the folded letter. You ever talk to them? She asked. He sat by the hearth, boots off, eyes fixed on the coals. I tried. They stopped answering. She nodded, slow. Me too. He looked over at her. The light caught the side of her face, sharp lines, wind-chapped lips, but eyes still steady. I wasn't a good wife, she said, but I didn't deserve what came. He didn't ask what came. She didn't tell him. That was how things were out here. The wind picked up again, but softer this time, brushing against the walls like it had lost the will to fight. On the floor near the hearth, Clara had left a small drawing, chalk on pine bark. It showed a man with 2 children holding his hands, all stick figures smiling. He picked it up, stared at it a long while, didn't smile, but he kept it. The sun came out 2 days later, clear and sharp, and too bright for the cold it brought. Snow melted in slow drips off the roof, but the drifts still ran knee-high where the wind had pushed them. Everything looked cleaner somehow, newer, but nothing felt it. He was mending fence posts when Eliza came out. Her shadow stretched long across the snow behind him. She didn't speak for a while, just stood there, arms crossed against the cold, watching the mountains in the distance like they held answers, or more questions. We'll be leaving tomorrow, she said. He didn't turn, just kept threading wire through a nail and pulling it tight. Her voice was quiet. Storms passed. We can find the trail again. The wire slipped and nicked his hand. He looked at the blood without surprise, sucked it clean, and nodded once. She waited a moment more. When he said nothing, she turned and went back inside. That night the cabin was too quiet. The children had fallen asleep early. Clara with her hand still clutching that drawing she'd made. Another one, this time with a dog, even though they didn't have one. Tommy curled up by the fire like he'd always belonged there. He sat at the table long after Eliza had gone to bed. The stew was cold in his bowl, his coffee untouched. The fire crackled behind him, throwing his shadow against the far wall. Something ached in his chest. Not sharp like grief, just dull, heavy, familiar. The next night would be quieter, emptier. Maybe that was better. Maybe that was safer. He rose, slow, and stood by their door. Not close, just near enough to hear breathing. He didn't knock. Just stood. Listened. After a while, Eliza's voice came. Not loud, not soft. Just certain. You'll never say it, will you? He didn't answer. You don't want us to leave. Still, he said nothing. She let out a breath, not quite a sigh. But you won't ask me to stay, neither. His voice came low, rough. I ain't got the right. A long silence. Then, maybe you don't need the right. Maybe you just need the will. The fire popped. A log fell. Somewhere outside, an owl hooted once, then was silent. He looked down at the wooden floor, at the boot prints Mel gown, Ted dry by the hearth, at the girl's drawing curled by the ash bucket. Maybe the silence was too quiet, he said finally. The door didn't open, but he felt something shift behind it. The next morning, Eliza didn't pack. Neither did the children. He didn't say a word about it. But at supper, he filled 4 bowls without asking. Tommy grinned at that. Clara offered him a new drawing, him and Eliza standing beside a cabin, smoke curling out the chimney, a crooked sun overhead. Eliza took a seat at the table, same as before. Nothing was promised, nothing forgiven, nothing explained. But they stayed. Not out of love, out of something heavier, something earned, something beginning. The road to town was long, flat and dry, the snow gone now, leaving behind nothing but dust and ruts and the kind of silence that presses behind a man's ribs. They rode slow, all 4, with the wind behind them and nothing ahead but the straight spine of the trail. The man rode in front, reins loose in one hand, rifle slung across his saddle. Eliza followed, wrapped in his old duster, eyes sharp beneath her bonnet. Clara and Tommy shared the mule, the girl holding tight to the reins, the boy leaning into her back, half asleep from the rhythm. Willow Creek hadn't changed much. A few new boards nailed to the general store, a new bell at the schoolhouse maybe, but the air still tasted of dry hay, iron, and men who talked more than they listened. The church steeple still leaned left, and the sheriff's office still had the door half-hinged from last winter's wind. As they passed the first storefront, folks turned, didn't wave, just watched. He felt their eyes crawl up his spine like ticks, slow, mean, curious. Whispers followed behind them like smoke. Thought he was dead. Is that her? Those ain't his kids? Eliza didn't look at them. Clara's hands clenched the reins a little tighter. Tommy squinted at a tray of sweets in the window of the mercantile. "Can we get some?" he whispered. "Not today," Eliza said gently. "Maybe next time." The man tied his horse out, eyed the blacksmiths, and stepped down slow like the ground didn't quite trust his boots. He looked across the street where the church doors were open wide for the afternoon sun. From the shadows a voice came. "Ain't proper, you bringing her back here." He didn't turn. Wasn't proper. What was done to her either? The voice stepped forward. A man in a preacher's collar. Thinner now, paler. Eliza's brother. By blood, if not by bond. "She ran," the preacher said. "Left her name behind." "She survived," the man answered. "Ain't the same thing." Across the street, the sheriff leaned on the hitching rail, hat low over his eyes. "That man's a ghost," he muttered to no one. Clara wandered to the schoolhouse fence, where children played marbles and skipped rope. She didn't join them, just stood with her hands on the rail, watching like someone who forgot how. Tommy tugged the man's coat. "Do we live here now?" He looked down at the boy, at the dust on his boots, at the faces watching from windows. "No," he said. "We live up in the hills." Tommy blinked. "But Mama said towns got schools." "They do," he said, "but not all of them teach the right things." Eliza came up beside him, chin high, eyes steady. She didn't look at her brother, just at the man beside her. "You still want peace?" she asked. He nodded once. "Then you're gonna have to fight for it." He didn't reply, just looked out at the dusty street, the crooked signs, the weight of old names nailed above every door. Peace didn't come easy, not out here, not with memories still walking around in boots. But as he glanced back at Clara, now leaning through the schoolyard fence, whispering to a girl with blonde braids, and Tommy pointing at the candy shelf through the mercantile glass, something inside him steadied. They didn't belong to this town. But maybe, just maybe, they belonged to each other, and that was enough. The evening settled quiet around the cabin, same as most, only deeper somehow, like the land itself was holding its breath. The wind had gone still. Even the trees outside stood motionless, like they'd grown tired of rustling. Inside, the fire burned low, just a bed of red coals now, throwing soft light across the floor and making the shadows stretch long. The children were asleep, tucked in side by side under the quilt Eliza had stitched together from scraps over the past months. Clara's foot peeked out, Tommy's hand curled in a fist near his chin. He sat at the table with a tin cup of boiled coffee gone cold, both hands wrapped around it like it held more than heat. Eliza stood by the stove, her back to him, shoulders set straight but tired. Neither spoke. She poured herself a little water from the kettle, drank slow. Then she turned and leaned against the counter. Her eyes met his across the room. Tired eyes, strong eyes. They didn't flinch anymore, not from him, not from much. "You ever gonna say what's on your mind?" she asked, voice low. He didn't answer right away, just looked down at the dark ring the cup had left on the table, then back up. "I ain't got much," he said. "No cattle to speak of, no silver tucked away, just this place, and the ground it stands on." Eliza didn't move. "I ain't asking for nothing that ain't earned," he went on, quieter now. "Ain't talking about love. Don't figure I'd know what to do with that if it came knocking. But you and them kids, you need steadiness, shelter, a name maybe." She crossed her arms, not cold, just thinking. "You offering marriage?" "I'm offering what I got," he said. "Name if you want it, roof, warmth, a place to plant roots. That's all I can give." Silence filled the space between them, thick and heavy. Eliza stepped away from the stove, slow, walked to the table, sat across from him, her hands folded over themselves, fingers picking at her sleeve. "I've been somebody's wife before," she said. "Didn't end like the songs say. I ain't looking to write a song. I ain't looking to get broken again." He gave the smallest nod. "I ain't promising easy," he said, "but I ain't leaving. That's more than most." Outside, a coyote howled, distant, lonely. It faded into the dark like it never was. Eliza didn't answer him that night. She didn't have to. She stayed. Spring came like a shy apology that year. Slow, uncertain, late, but it came all the same. By the time the wildflowers pushed up through the thawed earth, the cabin had a garden plot, a new roofline, and a second bed frame made by hand. The land didn't give easy, but it gave honest, and they took what it offered, together. The years didn't ask for permission as they passed. They just moved, like river water, steady and without fuss, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong enough to carve stone. Clara grew fast. By 13, she could rope a skittish calf, split kindling, and outshoot most town boys with a 22. Her hands were calloused, her hair sun-bleached and wild, but her laugh, when she let it out, was still young. Some evenings, she'd sit on the fence and read aloud from one of the 3 books they had, her voice clear in the dusk while chickens scratched nearby. Tommy took to fixing things, boots, harnesses, fence wire. He had a mind for mending, and quiet hands that worked without being told. He was 10 now, taller than his boots could hold, his face still soft but his eyes older than they ought to be. He followed the man. "Pa," he called him now, sometimes without realizing it, and when he did, he didn't take it back. The man had changed too, not in the way folks mean when they talk about clean shirts and church-going. He still moved slow, still wore silence like a second skin, but it no longer weighed him down. Not like before. His shoulders sat straighter now, and he no longer stood outside the cabin at night just to listen to breathing through a door. Spring came like a shy apology that year. Slow, uncertain, late. But it came all the same. By the time the wildflowers pushed up through the thawed earth, the cabin had a garden plot, a new roofline, and a second bed frame made by hand. The land didn't give easy, but it gave honest, and they took what it offered, together. The years didn't ask for permission as they passed. They just moved, like river water, steady and without fuss. Sometimes gentle, sometimes strong enough to carve stone. Clara grew fast. By 13, she could rope a skittish calf, split kindling, and outshoot most town boys with a 22. Her hands were calloused, her hair sun-bleached and wild, but her laugh, when she let it out, was still young. Some evenings, she'd sit on the fence and read aloud from one of the 3 books they had, her voice clear in the dusk while chickens scratched nearby. Tommy took to fixing things. Boots, harnesses, fence wire. He had a mind for mending, and quiet hands that worked without being told. He was 10 now, taller than his boots could hold, his face still soft but his eyes older than they ought to be. He followed the man. "Pa," he called him now, sometimes without realizing it, and when he did, he didn't take it back. The man had changed too, not in the way folks mean when they talk about clean shirts and church-going. He still moved slow, still wore silence like a second skin, but it no longer weighed him down, not like before. His shoulders sat straighter now, and he no longer stood outside the cabin at night just to listen to breathing through a door. He and Eliza worked side by side, through seasons, through hard days, through floods and dust and wind that rattled the windows loose. They didn't talk about what they were. No vows had been spoken beneath a steeple, no rings passed between hands, but she reached for his arm sometimes in the evenings. He'd hand her a tin cup without needing to be asked. They shared the weight of things in looks and chores and long silences that didn't ache the way they once had. Once in town, a photographer set up beside the mercantile. Clara begged for a family picture. He'd never had one, never figured he'd want one. But they stood together, him in a patched vest, Eliza in her work dress, Clara tall and grinning, Tommy with a thumb in his pocket and one boot half unlaced. The photo took, and they kept it in a cracked frame on the shelf beside the Bible and the wooden horse. Another fall, they carved a name into the gatepost. Monroe. Clara picked it, said it sounded strong, even if it wasn't real by blood. No one argued. The grave behind the cabin, the one that had never borne a name, got a new cross that year. Beside it, another smaller one. No names, just carvings. The man stood there once, at dusk, hat in hand. He whispered something, then walked back in through the front door, like it wasn't the first time he belonged there. Time didn't heal the past. It never does. But it gave them a place to set it down. And in that place, they built something. A home. Not loud, not perfect, but real. The wind came down off the ridge just after first frost, soft this time. Less howl, more whisper. It curled around the fence posts and stirred the yellowed grass, gentle as a mother waking a child. The sky above stretched wide and cold, that clear kind of blue you only see when the heat has long gone and the earth's bracing for sleep. He stood out front, hands resting on the top rail of the corral, eyes scanning the horizon. The pasture was quiet now. Clara had taken her own horse out that morning, riding strong and sure toward town. She was near grown, 17 come spring, and she rode like she belonged to the land. Tommy was off by the barn, hammering a loose plank back into place, sleeves rolled. Up past his elbows like he'd seen the man do 1,000 times. He worked without being told, still quiet. Eliza was in the cabin, humming low, as she kneaded bread at the table. The smell of yeast and ashwood filled the air, familiar and right. The man didn't speak, didn't need to, not anymore. The fence beneath his hands was smooth, worn down by weather and habit. Beyond it, the hills rolled gentle, the creek shimmered with ice, and the pines stood watch over it all, same as they always had. It was the same land, the same wind, the same cabin. But he wasn't the same. He looked down at his hands, scarred, thick-knuckled, steady. Then back at the trail where, years ago, a woman and 2 frozen children had stumbled through the snow and into his silence. He thought of that night often, not with pain now, but with something deeper. Like a book you've read through, cover to cover, and can finally close. From inside came laughter, Eliza's and Tommy's quick after. He turned toward it, toward the sound, toward the light in the window and the smoke curling from the chimney. His voice came quiet, deep, almost like a prayer. I thought I was rescuing them from the storm, but it turned out they'd rescued me. The wind shifted again, brushed past him like a hand on the shoulder. He breathed it in. Snowflakes danced in the air, light, harmless, just weather now. He stepped off the rail and walked back to the door, and for the first time in many years, he didn't look back.